Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start the bulletin with a check of the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump says a deal to end Russia's war in Ukraine is closer than ever, but reports no breakthrough on territory after talks with Volodymyr Zelensky. He says the coming weeks will show whether peace is possible as diplomacy continues with Ukraine, Russia and key European leaders. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, then sits down with Donald Trump later today at Mar-a-Lago. The talks focus on the war in Gaza, the next phase of a ceasefire deal, and Iran and Hezbollah's activities in Lebanon. China deploys air, navy and rocket forces around Taiwan for drills, saying they test combat readiness and warn against separatism and external interference. Taiwan says it establishes a response center and deploys appropriate forces, conducting rapid response exercises in reaction to the maneuvers. A fire at a nursing home on Sulawesi Island in Indonesia kills 16 people and injures 3 late Sunday. Officials say authorities are on site as emergency teams respond and investigate the cause. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversees the launch of long-range strategic cruise missiles, with state media saying it confirms nuclear and counter-attack readiness. The test comes as Kim showcases military and economic progress ahead of a key ruling party Congress in early 2026. Mexican authorities say at least 13 people are killed after an interoceanic train derails in Osaka with hundreds on board. Officials say dozens are injured, some critically, as rescue and emergency operations continue. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung apologized to families of 179 victims of last year's Jeju air crash and vows to uncover the truth. He says the government remains responsible for protecting lives as families continue to demand answers over the deadliest air accident on South Korean soil. 7 Turkish police officers are wounded in a clash with suspected Islamic State militants during a raid in Yalova province. Authorities say the officers are not in serious condition as special forces secure the area. Alright, viewers, we have some fresh developments now coming in from Australia following the Bondi Beach shooting. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that an independent review into law enforcement agencies is set up after the Bondi mass shooting will assess whether authorities could have taken additional steps to prevent the terror attack. According to Albanese, the review will examine whether existing laws or information gaps stopped police and security agencies from acting against the alleged attackers, a father and son duo, who police say was inspired by the Islamic group Islamic State. 15 people were killed in the mass shooting at the Jewish Hanukkah celebration at Sydney's Bondi Beach on December 14. Shocking a country with strict gun laws and fueling calls for tougher controls and stronger action against anti-Semitism. And I now invite Erin Watson, who is the CEO at York and Baker. He joins us from Melbourne. Thank you very much, Ms. Watson, for joining me in this discussion. Ms. Watson, sitting here in India, we can say these steps are much required, but what's your assessment? You're there in Melbourne. Do you think the decision is crucial, especially because many have spoken about a possible intel gap or failure that led to the Bondi attack?
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a really good question. So sitting here in Australia, on one hand, you think, well, this is a really good step in the right direction that we've had this call for an independent review. However, if you speak to the Jewish community, there was demand for a royal commission. And these two are really distinctive in what you're able to do, whether you go down the path of an independent review versus a royal commission. So in terms of whether or not people will think it's serious enough, whether they think it will be in depth enough, whether they think it will have the legal powers to get the information that's required, that's a whole different question when it comes to a royal commission versus a review. Now, the person who's been appointed for the review, Dennis Richardson, is more than qualified, is a fantastic person to be leading this review, but whether or not it will go far enough, I think that is something that the Australian public are yet to sort of come out and say whether or not they're happy with this. So a little bit out for the jury still on this one.
Let's also talk about the question of gun laws. Erin, of course, Australia had announced a buyback plan, but there was also opposition coming in from gun dealers and gun lobbyists saying that, it will also affect many law-abiding gun holders in Australia. There was also the question of pest control. How do you think Albanese will be able to address their concerns while also preventing illicit such a terrorist use of weapons?
The good thing in Australia is that largely gun reform and gun laws and the reform of those laws is very bipartisan in Australia. Most Australians accept that someone living in Melbourne CBD or Sydney CBD or the suburbs of Sydney does not need to own a gun, let alone 6 guns. Now, that is not a political thing here, and that goes back to the success of John Howard's gun amnesty after the Port Arthur massacre back in the 1990s. And he obviously a conservative politician who led those reforms and really took the gun owners along for that ride. Now, who are gun owners in Australia? They largely live in regional areas. They might have farms. You would argue that there is a requirement for them to have a gun. Do they need 6? Probably not. So I don't think that these things are particularly political, and I think that those groups really do understand that as well. You don't really have people coming out marching in the streets like they did back in the 1990s saying that we should, that these gun reforms are going too far. I don't see that narrative here in Australia. What I would say is that it's interesting how Australians really do get on board with this stuff, and now they're seeing how someone has slipped through the cracks. They want to know why that was, why that could happen, and that's hopefully
trying to find out the facts as to what happened in terms of attacks on the car, etc., etc. Instead of resolving the issues, it basically aggravates the local suspicions. I suspect that what happened again, the protest and everything, is that originates out of this deep suspicion.
With ISIS, usually it's not. So this is quite a unique scenario in Australia. The problem that we are facing, and we can see this in the streets day in, day out in Australia, is the rise of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Now, whether ISIS-backed individuals then support that, but we've seen bombings of synagogues in Australia. If you go to some of the protest marches in Melbourne on a weekend, you can see really vile anti-Semitic language that's displayed on signs and so on. Now, you should be able to go out and protest in Australia. Should you be able to go out and say such, incredibly awful anti-Semitic statements? I'm not quite sure. So it's, I think it's, when it comes to this particular case, noting that this was an attack on the Jewish community during Hanukkah, this is about anti-Semitism rather than a rise of radical Islam in Australia.
All right, sure. So even if the question of anti-Semitism is concerned, Jews are saying that there were enough warnings that were issued in advance. The attack was rather imminent. Even then, that threat was not tackled enough. How can that
Correct.
be addressed?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the Jewish community has made that very clear in Australia, that they have felt very unsafe for a long time, and an attack like this was imminent. And so I think that's a really sad state of affairs that we've got there. I think that, again, when we talk about this independent review, whether or not it goes far enough, and because it's not a royal commission, hopefully we'll get to some of the answers. Like, where was the failure in the system? Was it political? Was it to do with our security? Was it arrangements? Was it to do with something else? And identifying where those gaps are, because they're the answers that people want in Australia right now.
Erin, now, even though you've spoken about it already, but I don't think the question of radicalization, especially online, can be ignored, especially because these are not terrorists who had immigrated to Australia. They were the son, at least he was born in Australia and then decided to take up arms, right? And even recently, you would know how Australia has banned social media for under 16 kids, even though radicalization has not been mentioned as one of the reasons. Can that really be ignored as the one of the key issues that's grappling Australian minors?
Let's be clear. I did not say that this is not an issue. Radicalisation doesn't exist. Radicalisation is a problem. It's an issue that governments are grappling with around the world. Absolutely. Does the online environment help facilitate that? Yes. Did we see radicalisation prior to social media? Yes. Look at 9/11. I was 16 at that time, so I'm very aware of how radicalisation can come through without having to have the online environment fuel it, which it certainly does. I don't think that this is a debate about immigration either. This was an Australian-born person who was the son of the attackers. Well, one was a migrant. But I do think that when it comes to radicalisation, that is a massive issue that governments are dealing with all around the world, including Australia. The under 16 ban on social media is trying to capture a whole range of different issues, including radicalisation, but that is not the primary target when it comes to social media. There's a whole bunch of other issues like child grooming, child exploitation, sexual exploitation. Sure. That's one of the absolute key issues with the social media ban. So, these are all pieces of a much, much bigger puzzle that are not unique to Australia, but are certainly playing out in an Australian context, which is quite unique.
All right. Finally, Erin, I'd like to ask you, would you say it's time for Australia to join the global chorus against extremist jihadists, that are actually carrying out such elements?
Well, look, I trying to link this whole thing to Islamic radicalisation, which is a part of it, is interesting. I can see why you're trying to do that. However, the government after this inquiry will make a call on what is the right mechanisms for Australia to be a part of.
I mean,
globally.
It's not I who's trying to link it. That's all the reports that have come out. So I'm only trying to address those reports with you since you are there in Melbourne.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it is more than that. Like I said, one of the key drivers here is anti-Semitism, and radicalisation is one part of that anti-Semitic problem that we have in Australia right now, which goes well beyond what happened in Bondi. And so addressing that as a broader problem in Australia is absolutely essential. And this radicalisation and extremism is one part of that big problem. So like I said at the beginning, I don't think that Australia is seeing a broader trend of radicalisation, but it is a massive issue that we're dealing with as a country, as are many countries around the world.
All right, then. Thanks very much, Erin, for joining me in this discussion. It was a pleasure to speak with you. And with that, viewers, we're now going to move ahead. Now, Taiwan has stated that it detected 4 Chinese Coast Guard ships near its waters. Meanwhile, Taiwanese fighter jets have also taken off from Hsinchu Air Base as the island responds to military exercises announced by China. This comes as China's People Liberation Army Eastern Theater Command announced major military exercises around Taiwan, with live activities to be conducted on December 30th across 5 zones in waters and airspace. The spokesman for the PLA said that the drills focus on subjects of sea-air combat readiness, patrol and blockade on key ports and areas. Joining me in this discussion is Dr. Boni Yushi-Liao, who is Assistant Professor of Diplomacy and International Relations at Tamkang University in Taiwan. Thank you very much for joining me in this discussion. What threat, if any, does China's justice mission and these drills really pose for Taiwan's security? Okay, request you to kindly unmute yourself and start over again.
All right.
Yeah, audible now. Thanks, Dr. Liao.
Okay, sorry. From Taiwan's perspective, these drills do not point to an invasion tomorrow. What they do represent is sustained long-term pressure China is trying to normalize high-intensity military activity around Taiwan so that large exercises no longer feel exceptional. Over time, that kind of normalization increases the risk of accidents and miscalculation in one of the world's busiest air and sea corridors. And Taiwan's response has been intentionally steady. The focus is on deterrence, readiness, and crisis management, making sure that routine pressure doesn't spiral into unintended escalation. And for the United States, is that this matters because miscalculation in the Taiwan Strait would immediately affect regional stability and U.S. allies and global commerce. So this is about shaping behavior over time, not launching a war tomorrow. The real danger isn't intent, is miscalculation.
What do you think is also inspiring the confidence in some Taipei residents to remain unfazed by the military exercises? Because we're learning that at least 52% of Taiwanese are actually in favor of China.
Not really. What you're seeing in Taipei is strategic calm, not denial. Taiwanese society has decades of experience living under pressure, especially from China. People are very good at separating political signaling from genuine escalation. So when drills happen, but daily life continues, you see flights operate as usual, schools stay open, markets function, people adjust their risk assessment accordingly. There's also confidence in institutions, I would say. Clear communication from the government combined with visible preparedness, some of it reassures the public. Calm becomes part of resilience rather than a sign of complacency. So this is important because social resilience is now recognized as a core element of modern deterrence, especially in Taiwan, not just military hardware. So fear is part of the pressure strategy, and people recognize that.
What message is Beijing, in your opinion, really sending by conducting these live drills across the 5 zones?
This political signaling wrapped in military activity by conducting drills across multiple zones, Beijing is signaling that it believes it can apply pressure in a controlled, calibrated way. It's rehearsing its gray zone coercion, staying below the threshold of open conflict while maintaining constant pressure. The message isn't just aimed at Taiwan. This is very important. It's directed at Washington, Tokyo, and the broader Indo-Pacific. Who responds, how quickly, and how coordinated that response is.
And then if there is a blockade indeed, is Taiwan's military really prepared to counter it, or will it be possibly looking up to it from Japan and the US?
Taiwan's defense planning begins with self-reliance. I have to point that out. An initial response to a blockade would rely on Taiwan's own military, civil defense, and economic continuity measures. Taiwan does not assume automatic outside intervention. At the same time, a blockade would immediately affect America's interests and ally security. It's a fact. It would disrupt the global shipping lanes and threaten Japan's energy supplies and undermine freedom of navigation, a core principle of the rules-based order. That's why coordination with the American, the US, and Japan is built into deterrence planning. This is not about dependence, it's about shared stakes, because Taiwan doesn't outsource its defense, but a blockade would never be Taiwan's problem alone. So as a conclusion, the goal on all sides should be deterrence and stability, not drifting into a crisis that no one actually wants.
All right, then, Dr. Liao, thank you very much for speaking to us here at NewsX World. Moving ahead, viewers, let's get some news from Nepal. 2 popular leaders have formed an alliance ahead of March parliamentary elections in Nepal. that will challenge the older parties which have dominated the Himalayan nation's politics for over 3 decades. According to reports, rapporteur Kathmandu Mayor Balendra Shah, known as Balen, is a popular elected official. He joined the Rashtra Swatantra Party or National Independent Party, which is led by a former TV host turned politician Rabi Ramchane. Under the agreement with the RSP, 35-year-old Balen will become the Prime Minister of the RSP once the March 5 elections, while Ramchane will remain the party chief. Both have vowed to address the demands raised during the Gen Z or youth-led protests against widespread corruption in September, in which 77 people were killed and led to Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli's resignation. I now request Gautam Mukherjee, who's a senior journalist, to join me in this discussion. Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee, for joining me once again here at NewsX World. Mr. Mukherjee, do you think it's very interesting, the new leaders, the backgrounds that they're coming from and that they're deciding to join active politics, especially in the aftermath of the Gen Z uprising that we saw. Do you think they will be able to address the issues of the youth in Nepal? And if they are well equipped to do that, essentially?
I think they'll certainly try. And what is good from the Indian point of view is I think they lean towards India as opposed to China. They are, currently led by a caretaker prime minister. And she is inclined towards India. I think she'll stay in some capacity even after the elections. She's been a judge. And as far as this young man goes, I think he could bring great energy to the job in case he's elected and confirmed as prime minister. The other thing is the enormous corruption that has been part and parcel of not only the communist leaning towards China parties, but also the other traditionalist ones. That is something that Gen Z is very upset about, and perhaps there will be a welcome change in that regard.
We also cannot forget that one of the key issues of the protest and the uprising was the use of the social networking services. So that will have to be a key criteria for any candidate now who is taking up power to address. Can we expect these candidates to deliver on that, and how much will they be able to then strike a balance between the cons of using social media in excess and the other threats that they pose, including cyberbullying, and all the other cyber crimes?
I think this was a consequence of the protest rather than an everyday issue. You have internet connectivity all over the world, and there is no reason why they should be curbed in Nepal. As far as cyberbullying goes, that is quite easily curbed. And it is something for the security forces to look into, for the police to look into. And with the right government in place, I think it could be checked.
All right. Thank you then, Dr. Mukherjee, for this discussion. But I request you to stay on with me once again. Now, clashes broke out on Syria's coast between the protesters from the Alawite religious minority and counter-demonstrators, which killed at least 4 people and dozens were injured after a bombing at the Alawite mosque in the city of Homs, which had killed 8 people and wounded 18. Thousands of protesters have gathered in the coastal cities of Latakia and Tartus and elsewhere. According to reports, the preliminary investigation indicates that explosive devices were planted inside the mosque in Homs, but the authorities have not yet identified a suspect for the bombing. I request Gautam Mukherjee to join us back in the discussion here. Mr. Mukherjee, do you think this was rather an attack on the ideology of Bashar al-Assad, who is, the former leader?
It is, and it's also a assertion of the new regime to get on with a new Syria that is trying to be more connected with the outside world and not so much aligned with forces that were with Assad. This is not the right way, of course, bombing people, attacking mosques, and the new government must be mindful that Syria has been disturbed and a war zone for decades, and trying to rectify situations should not involve this kind of violence.
Sure. Well, we'll watch out how the developments proceed in Syria for now. Thank you very much, Gautam Mukherjee, for joining me in this discussion. Moving ahead, viewers, a tragedy in Indonesia took place overnight. A fire at a retirement home in Manado on the island of Sulawesi has killed 16 people. 3 others suffered burn injuries. The blaze broke out at the Verdadamai home, trapping many elderly residents inside. Firefighters worked to extinguish the flames which lit up the sky at night, while some residents helped each other escape. Authorities are investigating the cause of the fire. Manado's fire chief said most of the victims were elderly and trapped inside the building when the fire spread. The incident has shocked the local community and raised concerns about safety at care facilities for the elderly. That's all we have time for. Do keep watching NewsX World for all international news and updates from around the world.